www.untitled.org.za. And so please, for all those joining us, you can be a part of this dialogue by taking part in the survey. I'll post a link to the survey in the chat later on so that you can tell the UN how you feel about the world and what you want to see by 2045, which will be the United Nations 100th anniversary, and how you intend to be a part of that success story. The survey can be taken in French, Spanish, Portuguese, and many other languages. For those joining us on Zoom, you can tell us your name, which country you come from in the chat box. Send your comments and questions via the chat box, and also your Q&A during the Q&A section of the event. For those watching from Facebook via the Global Peace page, you can send your comments and questions again in the chat box. So at this point, we'd like to acknowledge all of our global partners here at Global Peace. That would include the initiator, African Center for Constructive Resolution to Disputes, the UN75 campaign, the United Cities and Local Government, or UCLG Association, Global Citizens, the SDG Action Campaign, the Millennial Movement, the All Africa Students Union, the Association of African Universities, and the European Students Union, the Junior Chamber International, Commonwealth Youth Council, the Millennial Movement, Millennium Promise Alliance, World Federation of United Nations Association. So as you can see, it's quite a bit of people from all kinds of different backgrounds who have joined forces to help make this event possible. And I look forward to hearing the dialogue. Global Peace is bringing this together because we're a global initiative committed to finding innovative solutions to the challenges that the world is facing by working together to create lasting peace. This initiative was actually launched in July of 2018 by the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, and Mrs. Gracia Machel, the chair of Global Peace. This was launched at the BRICS Plus Summit lunch event hosted for 17 heads of state. Later on that same year, from the momentum generated by that event, Global Peace was introduced to the global community during the Nelson Mandela Peace Summit at the United Nations General Assembly. The vision of Global Peace is to be a catalyst for collaborative efforts that create social compacts between governments, multilateral agencies, the private sector, and civil society towards generating innovative solutions to the ongoing challenges to peace and development. Working through young people across the world and key stakeholders, Global Peace will be an ecosystem for ideas, innovators, influencers, investors, and implementers to find practical solutions to global challenges, enhancing conflict prevention, and strengthening the global multilateral system. So it's now time to introduce at this moment our distinguished convener, who distinguished herself to put this dialogue together. She'll be sharing more information about UN75, Global Peace, Intergenerational Dialogues. So our convener at large is Nurlain Akbar. Nurlain Akbar is founder and CEO of the Water People and convener at large for the United States and Global Peace. She's also a member of the Michigan State Board in the United States. I'd like to hear a brief message from our convener, Nurlain Akbar, Abukar at this time.
Well, thank you very much, our distinguished moderator. It is very exciting to be part of this largest global conversation. The intergenerational dialogues are a pioneer platform where young future leaders that have dialogue with current leaders on the better world that they want to see, and also offer their input on how they want to see it shaped. The IGDs were officially launched in the city of Accra, Ghana on May 6, 2019 by co-founder of the UN SGD advocate and president of Ghana, Her Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, and Mrs. Garza Mikhail as the chair of Global Peace, and also the UN SGD advocate as well. In 2020, for most of you guys probably have seen us in social media, Global Peace has convened over several intergenerational dialogues across the world and part of the UN75 anniversary initiative. The Atlanta, Georgia, USA UN75 Global Peace Intergenerational Dialogue it marks the 93rd edition in this series of dialogues. So congratulations. We are in the last round. So working together for a better world, Global Peace has already held 75 intergenerational dialogues to mark the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. As a record, Global Peace has set a part of the largest conversation and in global history for the United Nations. So I know we've had a lot of dialogue so far amongst us, but I know some of our participants are wondering why partake in these dialogues. And it's a vital that people's voices are heard at this crucial time for the world. And collectively, the dialogues for the UN75 represent the largest ever largest ever exercise in gathering public opinion, crowdsourcing solutions, and global challenges. So each dialogue is also an opportunity to encourage local actions to build greater trust between groups and sectors, including PPP. Your views and ideas will be collected through our report and shared on an online platform, and also presented to the leaders as part of our official commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the UN, which is still ongoing. So we look forward to sharing insights and discussions from our country and to be part of a global conversation towards shaping a better future. So I just want to say thank you guys again for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here and contribute and add value to global peace. I will give the floor back to our moderator.
Awesome, awesome. Now, so with that being said, let's just dive right in. I see that we've been joined by the illustrious Dr. Chika Akua and the great Dr. Mawuli Davis, the attorney at law. And what we would like to do is actually just get the conversation going with an opening question. And I'll actually allow for you to begin, Dr. Akua, because one of the things we're looking at right now is this gap. There's a very significant gap on the global scale between where humanity could be if we applied ourselves to the best of our ability, where people could be if they maximize their own individual and collective potential, and where we currently are. And this very significant gap is obviously due to a number of different factors. So my question for you as an educational specialist, as the founder of the Teacher Transformation Institute and the professor of educational leadership at Clark Atlanta University, is what can we do to help close that gap between the dormant human potential that people have and the current crisis that we are faced with?
Thank you, Brother Ani. Peace and blessings to everyone. And thank you for that question. One of the first things that we need to do is to understand the problem in proper context. When you talk about gaps in the educational world, they refer to those as achievement gaps. And typically, African-American children are plagued with these achievement gaps between their achievement and white student achievement. However, that's an inaccurate conceptualization, because when there's talk of an achievement gap, what's missing is the understanding of the access and opportunity gaps. The fact that African-American students and African children throughout the diaspora typically don't have access to high quality teachers and high quality schools, that they don't have the opportunity to be taught and led by teachers and leaders who have a demonstrated track record of bringing out the brilliance in our children. And so that's one of the gaps that we need to close, the access and opportunity gap. In addition to that, we also know that there's a need to transform school curricula, because much of what is taught to our children and even to adults in higher education does not equip them, as Carter G. Woodson would say, for life as they will face it. As a matter of fact, it really leads to miseducation and diseducation. Miseducation, as I mentioned, deals with not being taught the truth about your history and culture and life as you will face it. Diseducation creates an anti-learning psychology in young people. To put it in other words, it's like, you've lied to me so much, you've miseducated me so much, now I don't want to learn anything, right? So miseducation leads to diseducation. So these are some of the things that we're dealing with in the education realm to begin to properly work with teachers and leaders to prepare them to truly meet and transform the needs of our students.
Wow, that's a powerful answer. And again, one of the things that we love about this platform is that it gives us an opportunity to highlight the actual work that's being done to solve these problems. You know, so this isn't coming from somebody who's just a theoretical specialist who's read these things in books and thinks it would be nice if they would be applied. You know, we have people who have spent years in the field creating the achievement outcomes that we need from this. So Dr. Chika Akua is obviously a specialist in that field who has quite a bit to share. I'd like to see if there's anybody else who would like to respond briefly, 2 to 3 minutes, on what was just said there, or if you'd like to answer the question for yourself. How do we collectively bridge the gap between the world we hope for and the world that we're currently experiencing? And if nobody wants to jump at it, then we can move right on to the next question. All right, so when we talk about the world that we hope for, and we consider the grim nature of the world that we currently live in, one of the things that's obviously on everybody's mind is the coronavirus pandemic, right? COVID-19 has devastated the global economy, and it has caused a lot of people to wish for a return to the good old days. You know, they're looking for a return to normal, you know, normal being the condition of the world just this time 2 years ago. But as we look at the way that this has impacted the global healthcare infrastructure, one of the questions we should ask ourselves is, what should be done in order to improve our positioning as we move forward so that we don't repeat the same mistakes that have been made in the past with regards to global healthcare? So I'd like to consult the nurse Brianna, who would share her thoughts on that critical subject. From a global perspective, what kind of models or strategies do you think should be considered when we talk about posturing ourselves for the 21st century and beyond on a new footing with regards to healthcare?
So here in the United States, we already have different levels of prevention. And when we're talking about the different levels of prevention, we're talking about a primary prevention, which is key to me because it's teaching you about preventing a disease or an illness before it ever occurs. And you have to be first dedicated and committed to yourself. You set an example for others. So once you follow a healthy path, you can then create like a cataclysmic effect. You create a community of healthy like thinkers and healthy doers. And I was actually able to visit a community in Israel who actually had a diplomatic approach. They were able to create a healthy community of people. They're living in harmony. They're the ideal blueprint of how to live. They have the healthiest standard of living. And they created their standard of living into a program. So they were able to collaborate with Accra, Ghana. They were able to collaborate with Ghana, the Ministry of Health, and replicate this healthy standard of living. And it's called the Regenerative Health and Nutrition Program. So this example of primary prevention, being a healthy individual, creating a healthy community, then turning it into a program that can be replicated throughout the world, that's the prime example moving forward, how we need to create programs geared towards like the different preventative measures and being a person in this optimal health, this optimal condition. You can now be prepared to combat this illness, this COVID-19, this pandemic.
Now, that's such an interesting perspective because normally, from my understanding, nurses tend to deal with major problems after they arise. You know, in an effort to say, you know, as a result of accumulated damage over the years, now we have this tremendous weight on our shoulders. I'm here to help alleviate the pain and suffering that's been caused by years, perhaps, of mistreatment of the body. So what you're saying is that an approach which focuses on looking at the causative factors which sustain the health before the onset of disease might help to limit or mitigate the worst effects of viral outbreaks and things like that when they occur.
Exactly.
And I think that's supported by the fact that much of the research shows that the worst impact of coronavirus was actually felt among those who had pre-existing conditions. And many of those pre-existing conditions are actually lifestyle related.
And we call those comorbidities. So now if you have a person that's not in their optimal health, their optimal well-being, you already have somebody who has diabetes or respiratory issues, and now their body is introduced to this virus. It's now attacking that body on top of the other illnesses that it has going on. So if you are already at an optimal state, you have a better chance of fighting off disease and illness. And I was saying about these levels of prevention. So you have your primary level, which is when you create the programs, you educate the person on being in their optimal state. But we in the US, in this developed country, in this Western world, we're more in like the secondary prevention. We aim at reducing the impact of the disease. So you already have it, but now we're applying some medications and we're trying to prevent the disease from progressing.
And I think that's a great lead into our next point. You used the key word there, progressing, you know, progress. And I'm often reminded of the fact that the term progress, you know, generally implies getting closer and closer to an ultimate goal, right? Progress is leading you down a path which leads to a desired destination. So when we look at the world today, it's quite often said that societies are progressing, nations are economically progressing. You know, there's a success quest that's happening on the geopolitical level. But from a United Nations perspective, we have to re-examine and reevaluate the nature of this progress and where it's leading us. So the next question is directly related to that idea. You know, the next question is, where do we think the world should be in 2045? After 100 years of United Nations development, international cooperative frameworks, if we don't have a very clear concept or definition of the vision that we have for the future, we're very, very likely to be progressing in the wrong direction. You know, and sometimes I think about the idea of like a man putting a ladder up against the wall to try to get to the top of the building. And through all the hardships and tribulations, through rain, through fatigue, he finally makes it to the top of the building. Bees attacked him and all of that, only to realize that the ladder was leaning up against the wrong wall. The ladder is leaning up against the wrong wall. He's on top of the wrong building, you know, and then he's progressed in the wrong direction. So what is our vision moving forward for the world that we would like to live in? And I would like to ask Mr. Bowles if he would comment on that for us. As soon as he takes his microphone back on.
I think that's the most common Zoom.
Yeah, number one.
The unmuting of yourself. So I think that 3 keys to progress, especially as it relates to youth development. First, it starts off with the youth and those individuals who are pursuing progress in the right direction to invest in themselves. Interpersonal development, focusing on the things that are needed for one to equip themselves with the tools needed in order to survive and succeed. The second would be mentorship. Mentorship is a very fundamental tool which allows an individual to grant access to things that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. It also provides guidance and it adds credibility to whatever structure that that individual is involved in. And then finally, I think community service, giving back through organizations and institutions, just having a willingness to.
Hello? Oh, minor technical difficulty. It doesn't resume in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're going to have to continue on. But the point that he was making was very interesting because when you talk about the future and the world that people want to live in, you know, one part that actually gets overlooked is who is going to live inside of that world. Who's going to populate that world? Who's going to be running the various institutions? So for him to frame his answer in terms of youth development is very, very interesting to me, because what it means is that we need to focus on unleashing the dormant creative potential of that next generation. And perhaps it's they who will help to figure out the path forward, you know, as society changes, as new technological and economic paradigms come into existence. It could be the case that we need to invest into the youth today so that they could help solve the problems of tomorrow. And through those 3 different points that he brought up, which I'm sure he'll elaborate on in his next Q&A session, we'll be able to get deeper insight into that. Did you want to complete your point? Because I see your video's back.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what you all heard, but I heard your summary, a brief of your summary. Interpersonal development is something that needs to be invested in. Mentorship needs to be pursued, and community service. That was the 3 fundamental points that I was making.
Awesome, awesome. So with that said, we want to shift gears again after I allow for anybody to respond to the points that have just been made here. Dr. Akua, should have guessed it would be for everybody.
There's an African proverb that says to return to the past is the first step forward. So even though we're looking forward to 2045, there's some things to consider. So as I was listening to Brianna, and she was talking about the idea of medical prevention, I was sharing this example with some college students just the other day, that when we look at one of the things that we're told to do relative to COVID-19 is that we have to be very mindful to wash our hands as often as possible. This is one of the places where understanding our history and culture is so important, because if you understand that the Moors in 711 AD went into Spain, which was at that time racked with the plague. It was running rampant, killing millions of people. And what they discovered was that the people weren't bathing or washing their hands. There was a hygiene problem. And so it was the Moors who lifted Europe out of the Dark Ages through their science and technology and their medical practices as well. When we look at what happened in America with the first open heart surgery, it was done by a Black man by the name of Dr. Daniel Hale Williams. And the reason his operation was successful, there were others who almost were successful, but what made them unsuccessful was that their patients would die from complications from the surgery from infection. And the reason they would die from infection is because the surgeons weren't washing their hands. This is something we've known going all the way back to ancient Kemet when you look at the original medical papyri coming out of the Nile Valley. So this is what I was saying about education, why it's so important to reconnect to who we are. This is what Dr. Joyce King calls memory justice. And it's what I call cultural identity restoration. And so I just wanted to raise those things to kind of bring everything together based on what we've talked about.
Right, no, that was an excellent point. And that's great because that's a part of the value of this intergenerational dialogue, is that we're not just bridging the gap between the generations which are currently here, but also linking it back to the ancient past and being able to learn from all of those things which occurred before us. As I always say in my classes, history is a body of knowledge that we can use to solve problems. And in all major areas, we find people studying history in order to solve problems. Doctors look at medical history. They look at your case. They try to evaluate what it is that went on that led you to this present predicament so that they can make better decisions. And the same is true in sports and politics and law, etc. And I think that's a good place to pivot into Mr. McClennan, because for centuries, the United States has been divided along racial lines. And this division has negatively contributed to social development as a whole. Right? When you take one population of people and you fractionate it up into all these different separate groups with competing interests, you miss out on the benefits which could be created by more social cohesion. So when we look at what's happening right now in the United States, when we consider the lack of inclusivity at all levels of the country, when we see how politically fragmented things are in this United States, what do you think are some of the keys to helping to overcome this? And how is it that in your background, in your profession, you've been working to help overcome the racial divide in this country?
Well, thank you. And that's a great question. I want to start with yesterday and the significance of Dr. King. And in particular, a speech that is very related to the question of peace and how we overcome division. And this was the speech he gave the year before he was killed at the Riverside Church in New York City, Beyond Vietnam, where he identified the problems of racism, materialism, and militarism, problems that are still here. And what we have done in Decatur is tried to connect what we see in front of us at a local level with the systemic history. And when we're talking in this country, being a settler colony, how white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism have driven these divisions, particularly when we look at the South and see the removal, the genocidal removal of indigenous people, the enslavement of Africans. And so when we see the legacy of that in inequity in school, like the issues that have been raised around the achievement gap and disproportionality in discipline, gentrification in housing, and what we've tried to do is connect the past with the present and target these monuments that were put there to establish a certain white supremacist narrative. And we were successful this past June on the eve of Juneteenth to remove the Confederate monument that had been there since 1908. And now we're working on another monument that was placed there also by the United Daughters of the Confederacy in 1908, commemorating this genocide that I mentioned toward the Muskogee people. So in the spirit of Dr. King, and in the spirit of the role that youth have historically always played in social movements for change, in the Black freedom movement, in the anti-war movement that Dr. King references, that all over the world at that time in the late 60s and 70s, young people were rising up against colonialism and imperialism. And that's the kind of movement I think we need again today to have a better future.
Good. And what was the name of the organization that you're a board member for?
Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights.
Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights. So appreciate.
With Attorney Davis as the co-chair.
Okay, Attorney Davis, Mr. Co-chair. I guess that makes it a perfect time to transition over to you. All right. So when we deal with these issues, my brother, you know, man, he and I go back, man. When we deal with these issues, and we look at the way that this political landscape, again, it's not just fragmented politically across racial lines or political lines, but there's also a serious generational gap, right? We find, for example, that many young people are disenchanted with the political process overall. And outside of things like protesting or maybe sharing memes on social media, they're not really engaged or really attentive towards the real life process of building more sustainable communities and engaging the legal system. So in your professional background as an attorney, as what is known as a super lawyer, what is the key, or how would you describe the principles that will help to raise legal awareness and increase the political willpower to engage in our civic responsibility to build a better world? How do we overcome that gap between feeling like we're just irrelevant pieces in a social machine that can't actually help make it move? And how do we actually bridge that gap and become more impactful power players, whether it's here in the United States or around the world? That's my question to you.
Yeah, that's strong. That's strong. Greetings, everyone. I'm very grateful to be able to join. This is beautiful. You know, I know some of you all, the power, my good doctor, brother, Dr. Kua. How you doing, brother? It's good to see you. So I think what we here's where we are. I start with my own children. They were in high school. My oldest son graduated from Howard University last year. And so 6 years ago, he was in high school. And we raised, we're an African-centered household. We believe that we have to center ourselves in who we are as an African people and then go from there, because that's where our power lies, in knowing who you are. That's where we have to start, in the centering of ourselves and of our young people. The centering of understanding ourselves historically, culturally. I always make the comparison, if LeBron James and Dirk Nowitzki in their primes were playing each other, and LeBron James tried to play Dirk's game, Dirk would beat him, because Dirk shoots that fadeaway. And if LeBron tried to shoot that fadeaway, Dirk gonna beat him, because you can never. Esther Roll, known as Florida on Good Times, said you'll never see a real a imitation diamond outshine a real diamond. So you have to be real, you have to be authentic. And that's by being rooted in understanding who you are, your culture, your history, and going from there. But in all of that, my sons said to us 6 years ago that racism that you all fight and you're talking about, Dad, is dying out. Word is bond. He thought that it was a person. He didn't understand that there was a system, and that there are people invested in this global system to maintain it. And you have to center yourself on that reality as well. So one reality is centering yourself on who you are, so that you can be total with the strength that you need. The other reality is centering yourself that we are about the resistance struggle. Quilombos, we have always found a way to steal away and reconstitute ourselves and then build from there. But the third piece, and this is, it's like not telling your child that fire is hot. You have to tell them that America is a fundamentally racist, white supremacist country. And that's what it is. And until we dismantle it, it will continue to be that. And if you move like it's not, you're going to get hurt. You're going to get burned. You may even get killed, and you get somebody else hurt. And so those are the fundamental truths that we have to center ourselves on. And then I'll be done. After we help center our young people and ourselves, then we have to encourage collaboration. This whole system, the whole ideology of American exceptionalism and Eurocentric view is all about individualism. That's dead for us as African people. That's not how we function. And so we have to encourage collaboration. And then once we collaborate, what are we collaborating to do? We collaborate to create. So we center, we collaborate, then we create. And so what we are seeking to create is a new world, a world that comes out of our African and indigenous spirit, that has with it a cultural value system that would maintain this planet. And that's why this conversation is so critical, because if African and indigenous people that are whole, complete, and clear about what our values are, if we are not in a position of power, controlling the world's resources and all of the processes, we won't make it. We won't make it. Because if you look at how long European and the Eurocentric mindset, and again, this is not, I'm not saying the white man is this, that's not the issue. It's a psychology, it's a culture that has been unhealthy for the world, not just for us. It's unhealthy for them. And so we have to say, look, there's a new day that we have to usher in, and it has to be rooted in our identity, culture, and values. And when we do that, that's our way forward.
Awesome, awesome. So I feel like that's a perfect, again, lead in. I like how all the presentations just flow right into each other, because when we deal with the subjects now of cultural identity, one of the things that we find is that quite often around the world, people and cultures are actually functioning according to like an isolationist policy. Different groups are all emphasizing the importance of centering themselves in themselves, building up their respective power base, and then figuring out how to relate to people outside of that group. And in many instances, that's very healthy and it's very productive, because it can be considered the first stage of any kind of national economic development program. But when we utilize this platform of intergenerational dialogues, one of the benefits is that we're able to now incorporate a diversity of perspectives and have people from different points of view talk about these issues. And when we deal with subjects like global cooperation, many of those principles which we would like to see in terms of international cooperative frameworks, nations working together in order to accomplish common goals, many of those political principles which we would like to see more of are actually manifested more frequently in the business arena and in the global humanitarian aid space. So what I would like to do now is bring on Rebecca E. Thomas, who's an account coordinator for CARE International. This is one of the leading humanitarian global organizations on the planet. They deliver lasting change to poorest communities in different countries. I believe they have over 80 different field offices around the planet. She can correct me if I'm wrong. But because of the nature of the work that's done, it's an excellent example of what it means to actually bridge those cultural gaps and work to have a non-exploitative relationship with people in different communities, different nations, etc. So in your perspective, and in your professional background as one who is skilled in forging partnerships and building bridges and helping to maintain and manage relationships, what do you think are some of the keys to navigating through this global landscape with so many different groups, each with their own perspectives, each with their own ideologies and definitions about which way to go? What can you draw from CARE's experience or from your own experience in order to help make intercultural dialogue or just diverse communication more, not just possible, but preferable, in order to avoid the kind of divisiveness that we see in today's world? Rebecca?
Absolutely. So when we think about these really big, complex global problems, many of them affect a lot of people all over the world. And you're right, CARE works in about 100 countries, I think exactly 100 countries last year. And so these big global issues, but we have to think with local solutions and how to fit the context of this one group or this one area, and the same solution isn't going to fit everywhere. So bringing in different stakeholders, I think again, because the issues are complex, a lot of different views and a lot of different people can help. And with the comment about people or organizations having different interests and different priorities, I think being really clear about the goals you're setting, being really clear in your communications, and building trust. The system or systems are failing many people, and trust is kind of the intersection of competence and ethics. So those are things that need to be really kind of transparent and forging partnerships. And I think a lot of progress comes through building trust and earning the trust, whether it's through the people you're working with or the people in your community, and then at a bigger level, partnerships and different types of organizations, whether it's private sector, government, civil society. I think we all have to kind of trust each other and know that we want the same best thing. We might have different creative solutions, and there's a sense of urgency. So I think innovation and scaling is really important, and taking learnings from early on. And another speaker was talking about, I believe it was Brianna, talking about, we learned something that works here, and now we're going to replicate it and do it elsewhere. And I think that is something that can really stick to.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I pointed to CARE, first of all, over 100 different locations around the world, not 80. That's very, very significant, because one of the things that we're looking at in the 21st century is the need for new strategies for sustainable development. The idea that everybody, if left alone, would solve their problems has been proven false. It's possible to be in a state of underdevelopment and seeking solutions that you can't find. You just don't have the human capacity. You don't have the educational wherewithal. You just don't have the strategic intelligence to really tackle these complicated problems. And that's what creates a need for dialogue and a need to be able to consider different points of view of people who have other perspectives than yours. And this is something which was common around the world in former times, and it's something that we might need to get back to. So I applaud the work that's being done at CARE and similar organizations, because it's necessary in order to move past, this age of divisiveness. And one of the things in particular that is oftentimes a topic of discussion when we deal with development is the topic of economics. Because when we talk about economic development, usually it's framed in the international development space, that's usually framed as a question of jobs, right? It's a question of jobs. Like if they say such and such a country has 60% unemployment rate among the youth, that simply means they need more jobs. And the solution, therefore, if you frame the problem that way, the solution is we need more people to come in, more corporations, more Starbucks, more Foot Lockers, more McDonald's to come and provide jobs. But nobody ever stops to think, or it's not common enough for us to consider that entrepreneurship is what eventually creates jobs. So now I'd like to turn our attention to Uriah IDL, who actually runs a very successful business here in Atlanta. And his LOJ Fit Club, I remember the origin story of it, starting small and going through all of the different developmental challenges required to have a successful enterprise which employs other people and provides a platform to create wealth and wellness through its unique approach. So in your perspective as a young African-American coming from the inner city who's managed to develop this entrepreneurial excellence, what do you think were some of the keys, to developing that entrepreneurial mindset, as opposed to the dependency mindset, which young people often have and which limits their potential and their ability to create? What can you share from your own experience that you think would be useful, not only for people in your particular situation, but people around the world who might come from different points of view and different backgrounds?
Absolutely. Yes. Again, thanks for having me on. I am with some power hitters, so I'm taking notes and loving it, to be a part of this experience. And so thanks for all of those who are attending as well. Yes, entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship to me, from a very early perspective, was something that when I seen there was a need for something, I didn't look to fill it with somebody else's idea of filling it. I said, well, if there's a need for something, I'm able to create that. And what is limiting me to be able to create that? And so with the young mindset at a very early age, you don't have all the fears of what could go wrong as somebody who may have been through life. So with that, that was an advantage. And although I was overzealous in it and I didn't understand all of what would come with that, that gave me an advantage to be able to say, hey, let's just go ahead and go and jump off the plane, and we're gonna build a parachute on the way down. And so that's what it was for me. As far as the African mindset in general, and then also, again, you asked the question and posed the question around the world in general, is that we have to understand that we have to glorify entrepreneurship in a way that has not been done in recent times. And there's a reason for that. And because if the powers that be can keep the people dependent upon, somebody coming in and storing a job there, then it takes the responsibility off of them, which then now you are asking or pleading for something when you have the ability to create that. How do we do that? We have to do that by means of integration into things that young people are already involved in. Okay, so social media, right? And being able to use those platforms, entertainment, okay, and integrate the idea of entrepreneurship, right? You know, I love the aspect of now not having to depend upon mainstream media, and now we have the ability to create this on our own, even if it's just through, hey, look at the lifestyle that I'm living, and I was able to do that through entrepreneurship. And so if we can spread this idea and integrate it at a very rapid pace, then we'll get the idea away from dependency, and then we'll be able to understand that we're able to create and be independent. Last thing I would like to add is that arguably entrepreneurship is one of the closest things that will bring you closer to or get you to understand the idea of a God concept. Because what the God concept is we also use the word interchangeably as what? Creator, right? Of taking a concept that was just that existed in the mental realm and then bringing it into tangible form. That's exactly what entrepreneurship is. So the more that we can integrate this into our societies as a necessity and not just an alternative, then we'll have more of a success rate. It is entrepreneurs who change the world. You know, the way that we see how to order things from a warehouse to now at your door in 2 days, that was an entrepreneur that changed that, right? Cryptocurrency, that's entrepreneurs who are all integrated into these things. Entrepreneurship control the world or move the world, governments manage them. So we have to be able to glorify that, and especially glorifying entrepreneurship from an African perspective for African people. And it's more so based upon Eastern understanding of not exploiting the earth, but harmonizing with the earth so that the earth can benefit from the fruit that we yield through entrepreneurship.
Wow, I think that's a very unique perspective there, because it gives a different approach to sustainable development. When you talk about, you kind of mentioned the eco-friendly aspect at the end, but the fact that some of the key points that I heard in there were, number one, the need to have an awareness of the things that people are currently interested in. Because as Dr. Akua would teach in his courses, money is the reward for solving problems, right? Meeting needs and offering value. And that teaching people the importance of being able to recognize problems and see the person who creates a bridge from the problem to the solution is likely to get paid for that. I think that's an important skill which needs to be taught that you touched on. And then you also spoke about being able to find whether people are already interested in whatever it is that you're bringing to the table. You said if people are interested in social media, people are interested in these things, then you latch onto that. But then you introduced a third dynamic, which is not very common in the global north due to the rise of various factors, but it's very, very common in the global south. It's very, very common in traditional societies, which is religiously informed or spiritually motivated perceptions of society. And the ability to have a culturally relevant approach to promoting entrepreneurship that taps into the wide variety of faith-based communities and religious institutions, which already have members in them, would be a powerful game changer moving forward. To, instead of just teaching people to pray for more wealth, to actually teach them how to create that wealth, and to teach them that that is a principle embedded in their own tradition, I feel is something that has global relevance for people from diverse backgrounds around the world. But I can't possibly move forward without acknowledging the fact that Dr. Akua looks like he's ready to burst at the seams. So I'm gonna go ahead and let him speak before moving on to Dr. Amira.
No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to really say, you know, what Brother Uriah was saying goes back to the real definition of education. African-centered education is centering ourselves and our children in the best of our culture to examine and analyze information, meet needs, and solve problems. What he's talking about is meeting needs and solving problems from our perspective. Attorney Mawuli Davis was talking about centering ourselves as well. So we use that to analyze information, analyze and examine information, meet needs, and solve problems. If you're not doing that, then you're not involved in education. And that's why I think that's so important to understand that, because I've never met a brother, for example, who was selling drugs, who wanted to sell drugs. He needed money to provide, you know, for his family. I've never seen anybody doing something illegal that wanted to do that. They typically were doing that because they did not see an alternative. So it's so important that we understand the power that we have to create jobs, or more importantly, to create opportunity. Because as you said, if you're talking about creating jobs, you can bring other people in to do that. But before we get into creating strategic alliances, which are important, as Rebecca was saying, we want to come to those strategic alliances from a place of power, not from a place of dependence. And in order to come from a place of power, you have to maximize the resources that are already at your disposal. How can you do that if you've never been properly educated on how to meet needs and solve problems in your own community, only to meet needs and solve problems in other people's communities? So I just wanted to kind of throw that in.
Yes, and that was a powerful point that you made. And I feel like it's very relevant again, because with this being an event that's launched in harmony with the United Nations 75th anniversary, it's important that we maintain a global perspective on these things that we're talking about, because these local solutions and local perspectives that we have actually have global relevance. And so when we talk about the importance of individual communities and nations or ethnic groups learning how to be more self-sufficient before trying to engage in the global game or the global geopolitical system, that's very, very significant. For example, in Africa, where these national economies coming out of the colonial period were reliant upon, or felt that they were reliant upon, international aid agencies, the IMF, the World Bank, et cetera, to engage them in such a way where they would be able to develop their own internal infrastructures. But quite often, because they didn't generate the wealth building systems from within, they were in a dependent state, which then opened them up for a variety of different problems, the structural adjustment programs and other things that would take a whole seminar by itself to go into. But because that's the lay of the land, and we look at the fact that these nations do need to learn around the planet, they need to learn the formulas which produce wealth internally, the formulas which produce social stability internally to the best of their ability, so that they can offer more value to the global scene. We see, with this being the decade, beginning, I believe, in 2015, the United Nations declared this decade the international decade for people of African descent. We're now going to switch to the person with the big African Union flag behind her. And she's the Chief Operating Officer for the African Diaspora Development Institute. And this is an organization which she can tell us a little bit about, which is galvanizing a lot of support, from throughout the African diaspora for causes and initiatives and programs in Africa. So when we talk about this idea now of maximizing human potential, we realize that while there is a need for individual countries to build their own internal economies and structures, it's often the case, especially in the global South, in what they used to call the third world, it's often the case that the diaspora of these countries, the diaspora of these nations have a lot to offer the people back home. And as Chief Operating Officer for the African Diaspora Development Institute, what can you say is currently being done in order to create a model for that unique kind of transnational development in terms of engaging the African diaspora and bringing those resources, those strategies, those systems and techniques, that wealth, those skills into another land? Could you please give us an overview? With your microphone on, it would be best. My lip reading game just ain't there yet, We don't have
Absolutely. There we go. There we go. Loud and clear.
Yes,
all right. Excellent panel. I appreciate the input from all of you. It has been wonderful. So to talk a little bit about from an African diaspora perspective. So again, I am a part of the African Diaspora Development Institute, which is an institute that main mission is to essentially galvanize the African diaspora, to promote Africa, to raise the level of awareness of the diaspora of the things that are happening in Africa, investment opportunities in Africa through the African Continental Free Trade Area, things along those lines. So because it's so multifaceted, one thing that we do have to keep in mind is really, I think for me, it all boils down to mindset, right? As we look at the mindset of community, of people, and how we have to understand that there has been some infiltration as it relates to the mindset and how we think, and it's a global thing. We lack a lot of trust amongst one another. Even just thinking from African Americans or Black, I know we were only African Americans since 1989, so thanks Jesse Jackson for that. However, it's just when we think about the mindset and the relationships that we have with one another, and then we're trying to actually bridge a gap, make a bridge between African Americans and continental Africans. So again, two separate mindsets, very much very similar stories in a lot of ways, but still there's a major trust issue and a mindset issue. So to me, I think attacking this whole thing has to come from a shift in the mind, because it is the transformation of the mind is what's going to allow us to move forward. And as long as we stay inundated in the current mindset of ego, of me, mine, those types of things, it makes it very difficult to build and to build the way that we need to build at the rate that we need to build. So when I look at things through the organizations that I work with, that is the first thing that I try to level set. Like, let me see how you think, because these are the people that are going to be able to provide the best type of leadership, are going to be able to get the ball rolling in the right direction. So through ADDI, there's a very heavy lift. We have a mandate and a mission that says, we want to galvanize 1 million people. We want to ensure that the African diaspora has the first right of refusal as it pertains to projects and things that are happening on the continent. We want to be seen as the 6th region, so we want that process to continue as far as legislatively having the diaspora recognized as the 6th region. But of course, we have to be together. We have to unify. We have to unite. And it's functional unity. It's just knowing that we have to be able to function as a unit to get to the goal, right? And because of the mindsets that we have, and it's unfortunate that is like really what it is. It's kind of like just a little shift that needs to happen. It's a little shift, but it seems like it's the most heaviest lift ever to really get people to want to work together and see the greater good, not their own agendas, not their own little piece of it. Because again, if you lock arms and everybody goes for it together, you will all get to where you need to be, right? You'll all get to where you need to be. And so in our organization and with other organizations that I work with as well, for me, it's mindset. It is making sure that you have your eyes on the prize of what the big picture is, what the goal is that we're trying to obtain, and that everybody just take one step every day towards that goal. So again, with ADDI, galvanizing 1 million people, raising the level of awareness about Africa, about what's going on in Africa. And we do webinars regularly on all types of points, whether it be reparations from different countries, whether it be, we just signed an agreement with Ghana, Cape Coast, Ghana, to build our first smart city, the Wakanda City of Excellence. So that is our flagship project that we're working on. So we are really looking to build something that probably my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren will be benefiting from. But at this point in time, I just know that if we don't do it and we don't do it right now, we're totally we are already in the 11th hour circle in the drain at this point. So it's kind of like we have to just take action, and it's all about execution, implementation. And, I like to talk a lot, but I like to do and take action a lot more than that. So we all have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think that if we unite in our efforts, that is the key. It's uniting those efforts, because I see so many organizations and there's just little siloed things. And it's not to say that they're not successful, that they have projects and they work. It's just to say that, if we would all come together, we could do this a lot faster, a lot more effectively, and, and just get it done. So I'm looking forward to getting to that point where we as a people can functionally unify to get some stuff done.
Right.
That's it for me.
That's like a drop the mic moment at the end of that, but I'd like to take a quick recap of some of the things that have been shared thus far, because we have deliberately brought together a team of people from different backgrounds who each have offered their own unique area of expertise. So we've had perspectives on health, which encouraged us to see the health paradigm differently. We don't need people when selecting the team. We don't need people who are going to basically say the same things that have already been said, because the things that are already been said have produced what we've already been experiencing. Words create thoughts. Thoughts stimulate energy. Energy demands that you do something. And once you do something based on the energy you had, which came from the thoughts that you think, well, then you manifest the substance of those thoughts. So when we look around the world today, we're looking at the substance created by the works of those who are motivated by popular ideas, mainstream ideas. Highly educated, well-qualified, certified people have overseen the creation of the contemporary problems in the world today. And in order to create a better world, a new world, we'll need to change those thoughts. And that involves new words. So we've had medical perspectives, which came from a totally different point of view. Sister, where are you from, Brianna? South Carolina, North Carolina?
I'm from South Carolina, Columbia.
South Carolina, and she traveled all across the world to learn a new idea regarding healthcare that wasn't being taught where she was from. And then she saw it being applied in another country and another part of the world, and is back here in the United States promoting that idea. And it's my understanding that you have plans to actually wind up moving to Ghana to continue supporting the development of the healthcare infrastructure there. We switch gears, and then we realize that we have somebody on the call who's involved in international development, humanitarian aid, in a key strategic position. It's often the case that people look at those with the personalities and the charisma and the people who like to talk a lot as the key to success of these large organizations. But like Amira Ansar pointed out, that's not always the case. Quite often, it's the people who are doing the behind the scenes work, the ones with titles like account coordinator and consultant and financial analyst and things that put a lot of children to sleep, but are vital to the success of these large scale enterprises. And then she came and taught us something that I think relates to what everybody else said. That trust, correct me if I'm wrong here, but trust is the byproduct of competence plus ethics. The ability to do your job well and to do your job right, I think is so critical, because you can have all of the other material implements in place. You can have the budget laid out, you can have the national economic landscape, you can have all of those things there. But if you don't have the competence, if you're not good at what you do, then it's likely not to succeed. And if you don't have the ethics, meaning you're not committed to doing good, you're likely not to succeed. You're likely to cause people to mistrust and to dissolve relationships. And the experience generated working at an institution like CARE, I'm sure, has helped to inform that perspective. And when we take the bird's eye view and look around the world at the geopolitical landscape, we see the same thing taking place. The lack of competence, the lack of ethics, or a bad combination of the two is contributing to many breakdowns, which again, of course, leads to conflict. This conflict manifests itself along economic lines, cross-cultural lines, across political groups, right? And across racial ideologies. And so this is why the work that was being done by the Beacon Hill Center for Human Rights, did I get it right? Beacon Hill Black
Alliance.
I got it right the second time. So the Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights is doing that type of work, and being able to see that kind of work and understand that the work required to overcome the racial divide and to minimize the type of tension that's currently being experienced in this country, it will involve people from all kinds of backgrounds. So here we are on a conference call with people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, all these different generations, different genders, different backgrounds, all coming together to collectively strategize a path forward. We see insight from the world of entrepreneurship and economics, which is clarifying the fact that we have to now teach young people and inspire young people to look for solutions and to understand their personal gifts and how to monetize those solutions in order to build sustainable wealth. And this is a different model than is often promoted, because when you said we have to glorify entrepreneurship, as it stands right now, what do we see being glorified, right? We see the glorification of all kinds of illegal activity, violence, prostitution, crime, being seen as the only way out. And by being able to glorify and put entrepreneurship on a pedestal, and being able to not just say that it's what people should do, but to teach people how to do it could become a catalyst to unlocking the dormant potential in many countries around the world, or in urban inner city communities such as the ones that you grew up in. And so then as we continue going on, we see Professor Chika Akua with the Educational Leadership Department at CAU and the founder of the Teacher Transformation Institute talk about the role of psychological development, talk about the role that he said diseducation, meaning I've been involved in a learning process that is so toxic to my understanding that I don't even want to learn anymore. It's different from miseducation, meaning I simply learned the wrong things. You know, diseducation makes me want to check out from the educational process overall. You know, and many of those who have been diseducated wind up having to deal with Mawuli Davis, the attorney, you know, and the criminal justice system due to something called the school to prison pipeline. So all of these different areas are interconnected. And when we deal with the subject of things being interconnected, obviously Mira Ansar's work with and Her Excellency Ambassador Arikana Chimbori Kwao and the African Diaspora Development Institute is all about generating that interconnectedness. And now I'd like to return back to Mr. Bowles, who initially started with the subject of youth empowerment, youth leadership training, and some of the principles that will be required in order to make that happen. But beyond the technical side, you mentioned mentorship, you mentioned these things. What is it that you think is needed in order to really help people craft a vision, right, for the future and understand the process required in implementing it? And the reason I'm asking you this question is because I do understand in your personal background, you know, being in law enforcement, serving as a youth mentor for so many years, working with local nonprofits and helping to empower, inspire young people, you've evolved beyond that role over the years and eventually moved across the country, meeting with policymakers and with educators, meeting with professionals from different backgrounds to gain more insight into the solutions to the problems affecting young people. This journey even took you overseas into Africa, where you continued on with the same process. So now that you have amassed this type of experience, you're kind of right there at the bridge, you know, between the older generation, you know, and the younger generation. And you're able to communicate these ideas across both sides. You can understand it from a youth perspective, and you understand it from an elder's perspective, because you've understudied so many elders and you hang out with so many young people. So with that being said, and we look at all of the diversity of perspectives, can you bring this stuff together and say, what is it that young people should do in light of the fact that we have all of these problems, socially, politically, economically? What is it that young people should do in order to maximize their potential? And how do we navigate through this world when often we are excluded from the political process? We're not invited to the table. Our viewpoints, our analysis, our perspective, our experience is not really being considered. So what do you do in that type of a situation in order to re-engage and be a part of the national discourse in whatever cultural context you're from? That's my question for you.
Well, great question. Listening to everyone on the panel, I'm truly inspired. Everybody's coming with so much experience and zeal and passion. And I can tell that I'm among individuals who truly have a heart to make a difference. And that alone is just, I'm overwhelmed. Great question. One of the things that I've heard, and many of you who mentor youth, and I'm sure all of us had some capacity to interact with younger individuals at many different age levels. One of the things I've heard is that when you show an individual a group photograph, when you show an individual a picture, if we was to take a picture of all of us here, and then you take that photograph and you show it to an individual, the first thing that they had tried to identify on that picture, one thing about human nature, we want to see ourselves. First thing you look for in a photograph that you're in is for yourself. You look at yourself first, then you expand out to take in the entire picture. Those of us who are leaders and those of us who have great responsibility from an institutional point of view, individual one-on-one mentorship, or just our experience in the world, we have to understand that in many cases, in instances where I've dealt with teenagers who get caught up in the trap of the streets, or they don't have an understanding as to what direction to go in, and they turn to what we consider to be crime in many ways, and just a lifestyle that's not positive for themselves or their community. The excuse is commonly, I didn't see any other way out. So those of us who are on this call and those of us who are policymakers and leaders, we have a global vision. We paint, we're responsible for, in many cases, painting the picture of what the future will look like through our experiences. And there's a gap between what we see in that picture and those individuals not seeing themselves in that picture. So when many of these conversations are even in their environment, they can't make the connection between their reality and what they see on a daily basis and the things we're talking about. We're talking about global economy, international travel. Some people never even been out their neighborhood. So
Right.
they don't see themselves in what we're discussing. So one of the major elements to helping with youth development and in bringing out the leadership in those individuals is that we have a greater responsibility of not just preaching to the choir, singing to each other, because all of us, we in harmony, we see for the most part a greater vision. We all have common values, the things that we all want to do that are like-minded, but we have to communicate to the younger generation the necessity for them to be a part of the picture. We have to help them to see themselves in that picture. And when you do that, they will then be inspired to fit into the picture and the framework of, of everything that we're discussing today. So that's one of the things that I've noticed in my experience, that many times the young, they don't see, they don't understand how these things are relevant to themselves, their families, and their community. Subsequently, the decisions that they make in many cases are not in their best interest. So that's just a critical point that I wanted to bring up.
Yes. Does somebody have their hand up? Or would anybody like to respond to that? Nope. Well, all right. So at this point, I'm going to ask one question to all of the panelists, right? It's one question we'd like for each of the panelists to consider, reflect upon, and then answer. And that is, if you could advise, because remember, the notes from this meeting, this is an international platform that the United Nations is going to be reviewing the outcomes of. So the notes for this meeting are going to be summarized in a report that will be submitted to the United Nations Secretary General. So if you had an audience and you could speak for 2 minutes and just have a quick message of what the United Nations Secretary General should prioritize as a part of their international agenda in order to help build a better world, what would that be? I'm posing that question, first of all, to all of the panelists. Dr. Akua will go first, but I'd also like for the people in the chat room, those who are watching at home, to add your comments in the comment section, because pretty soon we're going to be engaging you all. So add your comments either as an answer to that question of what the United Nations Secretary General should prioritize as part of the national development agenda or the international agenda in order to build a better world from your own personal point of view. And then if for those in the comment section who are watching at home, you can comment on, respond to anything that's been shared thus far. We're going to read your comments and begin the interactive portion of this presentation. But right now, Dr. Chika Akua, could you please share more with us?
Yes, Brother Aniam, and I have to apologize in advance because I did have another engagement that I have to be at. But I did wanted to make sure I answered that question. When you talk about what they should be thinking about and where we see ourselves in 1945, and Amira alluded to this earlier, we have to deal with the question of reparations. I'm certainly dealing with what that looks like in the field of education. But when we talk about reparations, I'm not just talking about in America. And that's one of the reasons why America is having problems dealing with it, because they know that there will be a cascading effect, a domino effect, that if America pays reparations to African Americans, then that means European nations will then be obligated to pay reparations to all of the African nations and other nations that they have exploited by way of capitalism and by way of so-called democracy, which in reality was really white terrorism. So I think reparations must be on the table, must be dealt with seriously. And I don't see us moving forward until it is, because there is a tremendous imbalance of resources in the world today that came about as a result of conquest. And there needs to be a radical redistribution of those resources by way of reparations.
Awesome. So in reparations, if I'm not mistaken, comes from the French word, which means basically to repair. So something has been broken and there needs to be repairs made. And that can take place with, like you said, repairing a broken educational system or repairing other types of healthcare infrastructures and things of that nature. So it's not simply, putting money in people's hands, but fixing the broken systems, which are devastating, the global economy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, who would like to go next? Brianna Atipo.
So I think one thing that we can all agree on is that in order to live in this world, we all need food, water, and oxygen. Until we can get proper food, water, and clean air to everyone, we can't work on anything else. So we have people in a certain part of the world that are thriving, and they're thriving because they have access to clean water, they have access to nutrition, and then, of course, clean air. So until we can do the basic needs, I don't think that, I know that this is a problem that we have to address. It's multi-factors, it's multifactorial. So just the basic needs, and then we advance from there.
Right. And so, I mean, it sounds so simple to say, but in order to live in this world, we actually have to live in this world. And so what are the requirements for life? And I think that's a good place to start the discussion, because it actually is the case that far too often in international parlance, people are talking about global development, you know, but they're forgetting the fact that the people in that society do need to live. They need to eat, they need to drink. And we have development models, for example, which prioritize things like cash crops, you know, and different multinational corporations that come to produce things that make money but don't feed people in countries where people are hungry. So to pivot towards more corporate social responsibility, in the sense that those who have the access to resources can't simply be exploiting and taking from them, which contributes to the situation you just described. People in certain parts of the world living, and other people in other parts of the world not living as much, or being negatively impacted by the lifestyles of those other parts. So that type of conversation, I think, is very important to help offset the disparity that we're looking at in today's society. Who would like to respond next? You're right.
Yes. I'm going to say an unpopular answer, but an answer that, if given some critical thought, that would make much sense. I think one of the things that we need to ask for is for the United Nations to be able to hold a strong influence of allowing sovereign nations to be able to create and give an opportunity to fix their own problems without the interference of superpowers who have an adverse objective to that nation's sovereignty and development. That's one of the issues. For an example, you know, if you look closely at the country of France, they have their hands in many African countries, and many would argue that without France's involvement with Africa, even to this day, that there would be a third world country overnight. And so if we can just be left alone in many of the countries that have issues, I believe that human determination, you know, in these societies will eventually fix itself, and a lot faster than what we think. And not being able to have these NGOs who are, you know, funded by governments, again, who has an adverse objective to the country itself, you know, in the disguise of aid, you know, who actually creating turmoil in a lot of these countries that are quote unquote underdeveloped. And you know, for an example, you know, when an African country, for an example, has an election, you know, that they're sending observers from the Western world to the election. And it's quite interesting to see the things unfolding in the Western world today. Like, how do you have time to send observers to countries, you know, who in many cases look to have a smoother transition than you are? But the observers are not necessarily in many cases there to actually observe what's going on, but to have influence based upon the objective of that particular nation, especially if they're a superpower, instead of allowing these countries to be able to fix their own problems.
Right. And that's certainly a very important topic of discussion when you deal with sovereignty and territorial autonomy, for the ability of each country to be able to manage its own affairs, while also working to counterbalance that with the fact that sometimes these countries, when left to their own bidding, become the playground of dictators who have negative wishes for the interests of that country and require international support. So it's a tricky balancing act that needs to be taken up. And I think having more voices at the table, as you said, to help determine the African agenda, for example, or the South Asian agenda, or all of these different nations being able to help formulate their visions for the future, instead of simply having them being imposed on them by outside actors, is very, very important. And I think it speaks to a need that is often unarticulated, because in addition to the practical side of the benefits of not having foreign powers manipulate your economy in that manner, which you outlined, there's also the sense of dignity which comes when people manage their own affairs responsibly. And I feel like that's something that is very, very important. Mr. Bowles.
Well, I agree 1,000%. I want to second and third what Brianna and our brother Uri mentioned. It's definitely a regulatory and policy issue from the perspective of resource management. Instead of there being a predominant focus on resource acquisition, there should be a focus on resource management within the context of what's needed from those particular governments or nations. So again, the last two comments echoed exactly what I was thinking.
All right, so what I want to do now is make sure we also are sure to localize our perspectives. Many of the things that are being shared are obviously from a global perspective because we're in a global generation, you know, and so it's refreshing to hear all these different perspectives from Atlanta with a view to the external world. But on a localized perspective, when you deal with the issue specifically in the area where we are, and we talk about the United Nations, what do you think, for example, Mr. McLennan, would need to be done in order to help produce a better world? What should the UN prioritize in order to help assist in the area where you work, for example?
Well, one of the things, the U.S. Human Rights Network was headquartered here a few years ago, and we were able, working with them, to develop a people-centered human rights framework for the public sector. So I think when you look at the Declaration of Human Rights and all the fundamental rights that we've been talking about, can all really come under the public sector in terms of education, health, transportation, housing. These are fundamental rights, and we need to build a people-centered human rights movement to hold governments accountable to provide and answer those rights. So that's one of the things we've tried to do locally, is see how issues are connected and move away from the silos, like Amira mentioned, to see how everything is connected.
Awesome. Rebecca, I'd like to, if you don't seem too anxious to answer that particular question, but if you'd like to answer a different one, I have one just for you.
Sure.
All right, so what effective strategy do you think can be employed at this time in this country, in, you know, like in Atlanta, for example, to help encourage more and more women to get involved, you know, and for more and more women to feel empowered to take on major responsibilities in society, because it's quite often the case that they seem to be shying away from those key areas. So what do you think can be done in order to help change that dynamic as far as the gender disparities that exist in key positions throughout the society? As a woman who's occupying a very significant position at CARE and has an incredible amount of work experience, I'm sure you have some key tips that can be shared to help inspire those who are coming behind you.
Sure. So I think that representation matters. Tomorrow, we're going to have a woman that is a vice president. And so when you ask a kindergartner, what do you want to be? She can say vice president or president because it's a reality. I think that the people who are a little bit more established can kind of think of the examples that they are setting for the younger generation, but being able to see what is possible and not just having it be something abstract in your mind is really important. And, you know, when we're thinking about history and progress, and, you know, we've talked about history earlier in this call. And one thing that really stood out to me yesterday in reflecting on MLK Day is that both Martin Luther King Jr. and Anne Frank were born in 1929. If they hadn't been taken so soon and so horribly, they would be 92 years old today. My grandfather will turn 91 this year. And sometimes I think we think of, you know, we have made so much change, but it's, you know, we've come so far, we haven't come so far. It's sometimes we think things are further in the past than they really are. So kind of keeping perspective, and just specifically with women, women got the right to vote 100 years ago, which again, that's really just one lifetime.
Right. Right. One healthy lifetime. So that's a good point. And I think what you said actually resonates with what was shared earlier, in the sense that when people see the picture, they look for themselves in the picture. When you tagged on social media, you want to see, where am I at? How do I look? You know, do I need to tell this person to take down their picture? Because I want to see myself in that picture. And with regards to there being a female vice president, that could be a major source of inspiration for a lot of people to know that they can actually reach for the stars, you know, and not settle for their position where they are. And I feel like that's very important. And as we continue to discuss various issues related to global development, I'd like to pose an open question that anybody can answer. And this is just something to consider. Maybe some of you have seen this play itself out either on social media, in the news. Prior to the emergence of the coronavirus pandemic, we actually know that there was a lot of attention being given to the global climate crisis, right? There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of Paris Agreement conversation and things revolving around humanity's impact on the earth. And then the coronavirus pandemic took place, and a lot of people had to go home, and they had to minimize the amount of impact that they were having in their society. They had to reduce. They actually wanted to reduce in their carbon footprint. And so in various countries around the world, we saw dolphins swimming, I think, in Venice, and we saw whales returning to places closer to land. Things actually began to normalize a bit because the technological impact and the pollution and all these different things was beginning to be reduced, and nature was beginning to flourish again. One thing that it seems like we can anticipate coming out of the pandemic is people returning to their previous way of life and continuing to flood the streets with cars, increase the pollution, dump more stuff into the ocean, and recreate the same havoc that we saw before. So anybody is free to respond to the question of what can we do post-COVID to promote or to sustain a world that is more in harmony with the earth and able to better address the climate needs that we have? Or do you think it's just everybody should return to the way things were and let the environment figure it out from there? Who would like to take this one on? You right?
Yeah, sure. So again, I'm in favor of always putting the hands into an individual perspective in smaller organizations and then to build up from there, not trying to go at a governmental, national, international approach. That takes time. It has to go through processes. And by the time they get to it, it's 2045. And so we don't really have that amount of time based upon what we are faced against today. So one of the things that we can do is those who are already involved in eco-friendly design in architecture and things that are, you know, solar power and things that are, you know, harmonious again with the earth and the earth's cycles and rhythms. We need to be able to give them the support they need to be able to not only continue the work that they do, but also add an educational component to what they're doing so that other people can buy into the idea of what they already, you know, do on a daily basis. And that's what we need to do. You know, for an example, just the innovation of something like the Khan Academy, where, you know, a guy who was helping his niece, you know, to be able to, you know, help her with her homework, you know, turned into a whole entire business, you know, multi-million-dollar business, to where now he's able to, you know, help people around the world just because there was a simple problem that needed to be fixed. And it's an innovative way to educate people without having to, you know, build schools and this and this and this. And so that is what's important in today's time, and being able to establish an educational component to the work that's already being done, but then also give them support so that they can make this on a mass scale. And that's what we can do at a very grassroots level. We have social media. Let's take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. Continuing on with that same theme, you mentioned social media, but we know that technology itself is an issue. And on one side, we have all the benefits that modern technology affords us with, but on the other side, we also see the negative impact that technology can have upon human life, in particular as it relates to the economy. So one of the things that we would like to discuss right now, again, this is an open question. At this point, we'd like to begin keeping our questions to a minimum, 2 minutes at the most, our answers to 2 minutes at the most, as we deal with the subject of automation and technology, and how do we prevent ourselves from receiving the worst impact of the technological fourth industrial revolution, which is currently taking place right now. Who would like to tackle that difficult question? Amira? Speaking of technology, we need you to use the technology to unmute. Yeah, there you go, IT specialist.
Oh my goodness. So I think with that, well, first off, I want to kind of go back to the previous question real quick.
Real quick.
Because I think that it's super important that we individualize these things. You know, let's not always say, oh, this organization, this group, this has to do X. What can you personally do? Like, how many of you leave the water running while you brush your teeth? 5 gallons of water is used by running it for 1 minute, and we're told to brush our teeth for 2. So that means if you leave the water on and you brush for the 2 minutes, that's 10 gallons of water that's wasted for you brushing your teeth. You know, so when you think about environmental stuff, you have to think about those things that you personally can do and can control. Do you buy bottled water in a bunch of little bottles and bring in the whole 24 pack of bottles? You know, those are the things that we have to think about. So don't always think about it from a perspective of this organization or that, or they need to do this. Just internalize it and see what you can do to make the change to help the environment. Because if everybody did something along those lines, it would get better just like that. And then to move on from a perspective of like AI and technology and those types of things, and oh my God, it's changing the world. It is changing the world. But again, my perspective, I think that it's changing the world in the way that it needs to be changed because of the fact that education, the way we are educated has not changed. Right. So we can look at a classroom today and we can look at a classroom 100 years ago, and it's essentially the same classroom. So the education style has not changed. So therefore, the things that we have been educated to do are essentially things that a computer can do. It's not the computer's fault. It's your fault for not thinking broader, for not changing your level of thinking, because our thinking has essentially been dumbed down. So when we think about an education system that was essentially training us to work in manufacturing and things like that, we are taught to, or we are trained to be able to to understand, to take orders essentially, and to spit that out, right? So we were trained to be rubber stampers, essentially. So yeah, a computer can do that, but there are a lot of things that computers cannot do. And that's what our focus needs to be on, is what the computer cannot do. Computers do not have ethics. Computers are not emotional. Computers cannot love, you know, focus on what the computer cannot do. And that is where the future is for humans, right? Computers are not human. All right. So be more human, and you don't have to worry about the computer taking your job, because a computer is probably just going to rubber stamp, pack a box, throw it in the box, whatever. You didn't need that to be your job anyway. You didn't need that to be your job. Right. You know, you are way more than that. And once we get into that mindset, you'll see that being more human and doing the things that computers cannot do is what's really going to change the world.
That's a really interesting perspective, you know, because it's a different way to look at it from the traditional one of just trying to fight against the change, but to realize that we need to be unlocking other levels of human creativity, which can do things that computers can't do, instead of trying to compete with the job of a computer to be an Amazon warehouse boxer, and things of that nature. So I see it's a tricky subject, because you got to balance out the fact that some people are just at that level of skill, you know, because of the education system. And that's how we see that all these things are actually interconnected. And in that manner, I'd like to ask Brianna a question. We haven't heard from you in quite some time. When it comes to the subject of recovering from the coronavirus, you know, you spoke a little bit already about the kind of position that can be used in order to better position people to recover from the outbreak. But could you give some specific examples from your perspective on what do you think can be done by individuals on an individualized level, in Atlanta, or if you would like, on a level of healthcare infrastructure in Atlanta, to improve the quality of life for people in Atlanta moving forward, you know, from here, as opposed to just, I know we want to talk the global scene and things of that nature, but what can people do in this local environment in order to build a better world as it relates to the infrastructures that are currently in place as we look to move forward into a brighter future post-COVID?
So I can say one of the steps that I've taken to better myself as a person is I started to look at documentaries. And one of them that was influential was called Cowspiracy. And once I watched that, it showed me that because I was eating a certain type of product, being meat, was like I could, one, reverse the effects of what was going on inside of my body, and also two, reduce the carbon footprint on the earth. So I think one thing that we can do is, on an individual level, like Uri was saying, is to first take care of ourselves by eating healthy. We're in the Southeast right now, and the Southeast is known for, during the holiday season, taking parts of the pig and consuming it and blessing it before we consume it, knowing that it's going to cause dis-ease in our body. So there's a cognitive dissonance. If you know that this food is going to create a detrimental atmosphere in your body, and what you're doing is you're praying over it and thinking that that's going to change the process, I think that we need to rethink and create a different type of mind here in the Southeast and throughout the nation. So maybe one thing, I know California has adopted something called Meatless Mondays. So if you're able to just take one thing harmful out of your diet, or one thing even more beyond your diet, taking something harmful, a harmful behavior. So if you're a smoker, try to smoke one less joint or one less cigarette in a day. If you're a drinker, try to drink one less drink a day. If you take steps one at a time to try to create harmony within yourself, then you'll see improvement in your diet. And then other people will see that improvement, because eventually you'll be like, you know what, that did kind of make me feel a little better. I do feel a little bit more energized. Maybe I can just take another cigarette out of my day. Maybe I can take another piece of meat out of my diet. Maybe I can take another drink out of my daily routine.
And maybe we can work to keep these comments to 2 minutes at the most. but so you believe that that the promotion of healthy lifestyles should be a part of the approach to infrastructure development, in particular with regards to the healthcare industry here in this region. And I can definitely understand that, because after working for so long as a nurse, you've probably seen a lot of preventable problems and just wish people knew more in order to protect themselves. So on the level of infrastructure, that's one that you would definitely think can be upgraded, and that can have a positive impact moving forward. Mr. McLennan, we're returning to you now. The United States is founded on a model of constitutional nationalism, you know, and the basis for constitutional nationalism is that there's a constitution which governs the entire social system. And the other unique element to that is that the United States is incredibly diverse. There are so many people from so many different backgrounds in this country. They have different cultures, different languages, and things of that nature. So how do we ensure that the United States continues to function according to a constitutional nationalist base without fragmenting into all of these different backgrounds? What can be done in order to foster more social cohesion in this country? Or in particular with regards to Atlanta, since you are operating out of Decatur, can you maybe give strategies, maybe from the work that your organization has done, to bring these pieces back together again?
Well, first of all, in terms of the Constitution, what we saw at the Capitol on January 6th really is in keeping with the history of white terror that started this country, and a Constitution that was written by slave owners. So we've got problems in terms of how we frame what we want to do in this settler colony, like I said before. I think at the local level, we have to model and carve out the space that is the way we want the world to be. And that's what we've tried to do. And with Beacon Hill as a Black-led organization, the work that we've done with our white membership to appreciate that, to understand that we have to follow the leadership of those most affected, that white people need to understand the privilege that they bring into the room and not use that to dominate, but to turn it around and use it in the service of trying to build the movements we need. Those are the kinds of things that we try to do on a local level.
Gotcha. That's awesome. And Rebecca, I'm gonna ask you a question. Just share your thoughts on the subject. When it comes to vaccine delivery, you know, and the realities of the coronavirus vaccine and its implementation, what do you think can be done in order to help ensure equitable access to the vaccine here in the United States? Or particularly, again, we want to keep the questions very localized here in Atlanta.
Sure. So I think the first thing is to make it really clear about who falls into what groups and what categories. I think people need to respect the process and not try to jump their spot in line. I think that access is really important, and getting enough doses for all Atlantans, all Georgians, but getting it to every neighborhood, every area, not just maybe Atlanta or the biggest city or the biggest hospital, but really making sure that it is accessible to everyone, making sure that people can physically get it. Maybe if they can't drive, making sure they have someone to take them to an appointment. And I think just those things are top of mind. I'm not a medical expert, but I do know how important this is, and it's on everyone's mind.
Right, absolutely. And then my last question for Mr. Bolds. With your experience as a law enforcement officer, and then of course, coupling that along with your international travels, we have questions concerning global peace today. And as technology continues to increase and more nations have access to more destructive weapons, more malicious form, more things of that nature develop, what do you think can be done in order to help ensure a more peaceful future in light of the fact that people have more access to more weapons? So what type of strategies, what type of frameworks need to be considered? Let's localize it again here in Atlanta in order to help individuals, help people, families, communities, neighborhoods, cities, local provinces, ensure more peaceful outcomes and overcome the realities affecting us in terms of gang violence, crime, and all those other undesirable elements. What can you draw from your law enforcement experience that would help to light a light on the path out of that darkness?
Well, contemporary weapons, or the weapons, are not the problem. It's the reason for the acquisition and usage of those weapons. Why do people find themselves in a position where they're taking up arms against other individuals? It ties right back into what we've been discussing this whole time. Once, like Ms. Brianna mentioned, once you provide the people, once governments provide the people with access to basic resources they need to live, then conflict will decrease. Most conflict, besides the ideological wars and the ideological differences in terms of, religious conflicts and things of that nature, but just on a basic level, dealing with the economics and dealing with whether or not people have access to fundamental essentials, the more those things are provided for the community as a whole, then you will see a reduction in conflict, war, violence, etc. So it all goes back to what we've been talking about and discussing on during this whole dialogue. We have to, as leaders, begin to inspire the people to see themselves in the picture. And the picture matters, and what we're discussing here now is taking ourselves in the direction where we're talking about true sustainability, true homeostasis, true synergy across all facets of the society as a whole. So again, to directly go back to your question, I'll keep it under the 2 minutes. The more individuals have access to the basic necessities of life, then I believe that you'll see a reduction in conflict, whether it's from individual to individual, community to community, nation to nation.
Gotcha. So at this point, I just want to read a few of the comments that have been shared earlier in the presentation. We had Tariq comment on the importance of education. And he said that to make a better world, I think what should be focused on is education. From the time children start school, they should be exploring different skills, trades, and talents that they may have or be interested in, so that by the time they graduate, we'll have young adults actually built and ready to go into the world with a clear mind of what they want to do in their life. And I think that's very important. I think the lack of effective educational systems creates a generation of adults who don't know what they want to do, and that can lead them anywhere. And quite often that's towards a path that we wouldn't prefer for them to go. Maggie Malloy commented on the concept that some groups have been paid reparations from former colonial masters, but not nearly at the level that is needed. And this is true. We see that Tyreek chimed back in and mentioned that with regards to healthcare, if we can't take accountability for our own health, then we lower our years on this earth more and more each year. And without health, we can't even build a nation because no one is healthy enough to do it. Another great point. You know, in order to live on this planet, you actually have to live on this planet. Mawulia Davis, of course, he had to step out, so he thanked everybody for their time and energy. And we have a few more comments. Tariq wrote a whole book that anybody can read on the side. Y'all can go ahead and download the PDF because I don't have time to read all of those things. And at this phase, we're going to start closing out. So we've had a lot of different key points shared throughout the course of this presentation. I'm very excited by the outcomes of this meeting, and I'm glad that all of you took the time out of your busy schedules to come and participate so that we all can benefit from the diversity of people on this panel. I hope that everybody feels like they've been able to contribute meaningfully. I know that I gained a lot from it. I hope that all of the people who participated and those who watched at home also gained a lot from the experience. We look forward to having more such dialogues in the future, and let's all stay in touch. On this note, we wish to express our gratitude to all of our partners that work together to make this dialogue a success. And again, that includes the African Center for Constructive Resolution to Disputes, UN75, the United Cities and Local Government, UCLG Association, the Global Citizens, the Sustainable Development Goals Action Campaign, the Millennium Movement, the All Africa Students Union, Association of African Universities, the European Students Union, the Junior Chamber International, Commonwealth Youth Council, Millennium Promise Alliance, and the World Federation of United Nations Associations. And at this point, if our convener is still online, Nora Lane, if you could give us our final acknowledgements, we can begin closing out. Off mute, please.
Okay, I just want to, you've done a very good job as far as recapping, and it never feels like it never fails to, for me to learn something new. I was sitting here just listening and I'm like, wow, whenever you feel down and you feel like, you know, you are in the trenches, you forget that there's so many other people right along there with you. So just to do a little bit of acknowledgements before we wrap up, I wish to acknowledge the Chair of Global Peace, Madame Garza Miquel, and also the Chair of the African Center for Constructive Resolution of Disputes, Accord, and the United Nations SGDs activist. Also, the founder of Global Peace, I just want to thank him personally and everyone that's, you know, here. The director, his name is Dr. Vasu Gauden. Thank you so much for creating this initiative in the future of building a better world. Also, thank you to the UN75 for the opportunity to develop this platform with us, and also seeing our vision for the world that we want in the future, especially by 2045 when the UN turns 100. And not last but least, one of the greatest people that actually put this together, we would like to also express our earnest gratitude to Mr. Kobla Estami. He's actually on the call, he's been listening, the coordinator for intergenerational dialogues, and Mrs. Krishma Roju, the coordinator for Global Peace, and their extraordinary work on putting these dialogues together and bringing them to fruition. Indeed, we are indebted to them, and also Global Peace is proud of everyone and all of you guys. And also, I cannot forget my dearest and our dearest distinguished panelists, also, and our participants. I want to say that it's never enough for us to say thank you for actually taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here and contribute to this great cause. But without a doubt, you know, the future of global peace is definitely global peace, and global peace tends to be or will be working on being the hub that creates ideas, influencers, investors, implementers to find practical solutions to global challenges. Global Peace is working together for a better world. So I know we have already shared our social media handles. So I would love to continue this conversation with you guys. And I want to say thank you, for being here again. Please stay safe and stay blessed. And I think because of your dialogue, I was really inspired to leave you guys with my favorite quote. You can give me a second. So this quote is by Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, that's all that's only the thing the world has. So I just want you guys to leave this call knowing that we started something and it's only a small group of us that are really going to see the change that we seek. So just know that you're appreciated. And if you ever need help or if you ever feel like, you need to be reminded of your great work, we're always here. And don't forget to connect on social media. Also for the participants, don't forget to connect with us on social media. I will leave the moderator for the last call, or the last say, but it was nice meeting you all and I'm humbled to have you.
Awesome. So again, for all the people who want to continue on with the dialogue, you can log on to our pages and like them. This will enable you to be part of the Global Peace team. You can receive news, you can make comments, and you can give suggestions about how to be a part of this ongoing Global Peace conversation. So again, you can go into the chat section. You'll see that at Facebook, we can be found at Global Peace. Twitter is Global Peace HQ. At Instagram, it's globalpeace.hq. And YouTube is just Global Peace again. If you want to check out our website, go to www.globalpeace.me. Or for our official website, www.accord.org.za. .za means it's headquartered in South Africa. And so, again, so much has been said, it's hard to put a bow on all of it and wrap it all up. So, and everybody who knows me knows I'll put us on here for another 3 minutes. So if the convener doesn't just shut me off, it's gonna just keep. But no, let's definitely continue the dialogue. I look forward. Myself personally, I'll be hosting events like this once a month, every month for the rest of the year. So let's all keep in touch and see what we can do moving forward to keep the conversation going and the manifestations occurring all around us. And with that, I'll leave you as I came in perfect love and peace. Goodbye, good night, and enjoy yourselves.
Stay safe, everyone. Take care. Good night.